Hi, Radhika. Welcome to Win in the Turns.
Nice to see you, Praveen. Thank you.
It's been long, long, long years.
It's a very long time, actually. We're talking decades here, right?
Yes, we are. Definitely decades. And even when we were doing the prep call, I remember we were
Yes.
like, wow, it's been ages that we haven't even spoken to each other.
Yes, but it was super interesting catching up after so many years and figured out how we navigated different career paths as well.
Yeah, it's interesting, when you catch up with people you haven't, talked to for like years, but you have been close to them, and then suddenly you see, hey, here's the navigation taken you. So that's interesting.
Yep, totally.
So, uh, yeah, we'll have a conversation on a few topics, but I want to start with something you told me that the biggest challenge you want to be solved is a healthy and a happy world.
Mm.
What do you mean by that?
It was actually really difficult to come up with that response or that answer. Um, and I reflected on it a little bit. Health can mean many things, and that has shifted over the years, right? Over decades, as we started living longer, our expectations of what living healthy is has changed significantly as well. But being healthy means you can do things, right? It's as simple as that. You can be productive, you can make things happen. And that's why, for me, with health, you can make a lot of change. That was critical to it. Happiness is a slightly more tricky thing. It can also mean a lot of different things, but in our kind of endless pursuit of all things material, one
Hmm.
sometimes forgets that happiness can come from very simple things. So I'm really talking in both cases of an almost mindset shift in there. I'm not talking about big challenges that technology can solve. It's about finding the simple things, eating right, doing the exercise that keeps you going, and being happy with the small things we have.
So, do you think you are at the crossroad of healthy and happy?
Um, I would say currently I am pretty close to where I would like to be. Am I like fully there in the perfect world? No, I'm not. There's a lot of things I can change for sure.
Okay. What were you like a kid? What were you like a kid?
What was I like a kid? Um, I think so. I was always an introvert, but very tight with my friends. So I had a very, very good group of friends. Um, I really, really enjoyed participating in a number of activities as well. So, grew up in a small township. I mean, very unlike the rest of chaotic small town India. It was set up around a big hydroelectric plant, so you only had engineers or doctors living there. Very structured, calm life, just afforded me the space to try out a number of different things. So I was into a number of different things, from sports and swimming to dancing and other things, as well as doing other things with friends and academically as well. So um, I was into a number of things growing up. Yes.
Did you had like a role model growing up?
Um, um, I would say lots of role models. I would say uh, strong female role
Hmm.
models as well, both from the daily walks of life, where someone more senior than you presented a certain confident personality and was able to do things. But I would also say both from the political sphere, from sports, and actually, I read a lot growing up from all kinds of books, and I found both some female authors very inspirational, as well as some of the characters from their books, to be honest.
Do you still read a lot?
I do read a lot. I've both in London, where I lived for over 20 years, and now in Dubai. One of the things I did was start a book club with
Oh,
a small group. So it really opens up my horizons. I think I've lived a number of different worlds through reading books. So that continues to be a strong part of my life. And in this most recent move, it really helped me understand some of the nuances, right? The cultural norms of different places because we meet as a group, we meet at each other's homes, and I meet so many different people from different backgrounds, rarely intermingle. But we also reading, for example, books that are set in this region. And then because you're then discussing, it just lends itself to a much richer absorption of the culture around us.
So I had a question for you, maybe later part, but I'll ask right now. How the transition has been, because you lived in multiple countries for a considerable amount of time. So how's that been for you?
Interesting question, Praveen. I would almost say it goes through a few phases. I mean, I am one of those people who's fascinated by different places, and I feel you don't get a real sense of a place unless you live there. Having said that, I've only lived in a small number of different places, but the first phase is driven by curiosity, a little bit of adventure, of discovering, new things, new people, new ways of doing things, which I also find quite liberating because suddenly the norms and the expectations shift in a new place. Then I think comes a second phase, which is more difficult when you realize that you have to adapt to things. They are not the same old familiar things. And that can sometimes be a little bit scary. But I found all of those experiences super enriching, really. Just allowing you in some ways to continue to be curious, to learn from different perspectives, and also I think realize that while we have, I guess as humans, we can share many very similar values, you can approach them very, very differently and still make a success out of it for yourself. So no, I enjoy it a lot.
Very cool. So what have you learned about yourself in last, say, year or so that has surprised you in some odd way?
Praveen, I would say, I mean, it's probably something you've heard from many people, but I think I was totally blind to being a perfectionist in many ways. So I really considered it as a positive trait until I
Okay.
realized at some point that it just doesn't allow me to move at pace. So I think I discovered how you can make change happen by not being perfect, by looking at execution, looking at pace, and really iterating on things. So that was, I think, a big surprise for me in the last few years.
Funny thing that happened to me maybe a few years back as well is like it takes a while to sort of, and it's not just humility, it's just, being open to that idea that, there is a new way to sort of see things. And it's just not your way of getting things done.
Yeah, or you cannot make progress just by sitting in one place and thinking it all out.
True,
Sometimes
true.
you have to test it out and then iterate to get to the right answer.
Correct. So did healthcare happen by accident or design?
I was telling you, I grew up in a community of primarily doctors and engineers. So I actually don't know whether it happened by accident. It was, I think, built into me as I grew
Okay.
up that those were the professions that you were exposed to and that were valued where I was growing up. In fact, I was looking back, even at school, the only option was science, right? There was no other option. So it became a natural choice to go in that direction, though I mean, to be very honest, I do have a creative streak. I believe I might have, if I had the opportunity, gone slightly laterally, even into architecture or design. Even contemplated at some point into going into classical dance, for example. I mean, it fell by pretty quickly, but it was still in consideration at some point.
Say more on that. I know you talked about it earlier when we were chatting, but say more on the dancing part. That's interesting.
It was actually, I think you probably know, and I haven't kept track, but there was this Indian dancer, Pratima Bedi, who had a dance institute in Bangalore. This was actually prompted by my mother, and this was when I was doing my master's already, to just let me know, give me a nudge, because I learned Bharatanatyam for many, many years, but it was like a side hobby, things that you do when you're growing up. And she said, "Oh, she is in town in Delhi, and this is her address where she's staying," which somehow my mom had all found out. Do you want to go and meet her? Which I did, and I found it super inspiring, but also super, how can I say, committed to a track that I hadn't fully planned for. So at something like 22 years of age, it would mean the next 4 years you would stay in Nityagram and only do dancing. And that at that point, when it came to making the decision, felt too radical for me. So I didn't have the courage to pursue that path at that stage.
Yeah, I think life happens in chapters. And the only way to figure it out when you look back as to, hey, this is what happened to me when I was like 10 to 20 or 20 to 29 or whatever, right? So
Yeah.
it's certainly you say that. So how's the transition for a zoology major to the world of business management?
I'm actually I enjoyed the science, right? I enjoyed that part, and I mean, it fascinated me, and it fascinates me even today. In fact, the more I study science, the more I realize there's so many things we don't understand, and that's another track we can talk about a little bit. But I enjoyed the science, but I very quickly realized while doing zoology, especially doing all the practical work, that that was not my my mojo lay. I do enjoy working with people, always engaging, organizing, leading, trying to make impact that was broader. So I did not see myself growing academically into research. For example, I was very much keen to do something that might have an impact also in healthcare, but in a different way, maybe even in a broader way with the knowledge of the science, but by implementing it more broadly.
Tell me something. There's always moments in our life where we feel that they change the trajectory of where we are today. Did you feel that you have such moments, and what might those be?
Yeah. Um, Probably several if I think about it, but I'll share a couple or two or three. The very first was very defining for me in terms of self confidence and leadership that I go back to even in moments when I'm unsure today. In school, I took the position for the head girl of the school.
Okay.
In many ways, it wasn't a difficult role to do at all, but it gave you the responsibility for the first time to represent a big cohort and see what changing processes, bringing new ideas, convincing other people really meant. So I thought that gave me the confidence to take many other roles later in life, funnily enough. Second time, or I've had twice had some experiences where it's very interesting on reflection. I have looked at changing my role quite drastically, moving like laterally into another function. Once when I moved from commercial operations into the rare disease business at Pfizer, and another time when I moved after having worked most of my career across the international developed markets into emerging markets. Both times, I had someone who put their trust in me, is how I look at it. I did not have the experience for the roles that I was offered, but I probably had the passion and the willingness to learn and make a difference. And that really changed the trajectory of what I did next. And these were both, interestingly, situations or events where the leaders who took that action were people who had worked in many different countries, had experiences, and I thought were somehow broader in their thinking as well, or that's how I like to see it. So, those are two examples that really changed both my confidence in what I could do and the trajectory of my career as well.
No, I think you're right. So obviously we need mentors and people who sort of help us sort of set some direction and some ways of doing things. It's also the an innate being open to do that, right? It's like, somebody can send you a direction and, hey, go do this, or you can do this, but it's also you have to be open to doing something like that. And most people are not. It's, and especially someone like you who came from a different part of the world, living now in, worked in different part of the world, and now working in different part of the world, you know,
Yeah, but all of
it
those
can be something.
experiences, Praveen, they add up somewhere, right? In your subconscious, they're giving you a little bit of confidence. But most importantly, I did feel, I mean, I really do feel, and I'm very grateful that there were other people who were willing to take that risk as well. There was a little bit of a nudge to say, I think you can do it, go for it. And that made a big difference to me personally.
So how do you make decisions like big ones, both personally and professionally?
Um, I'm a very intuitive person, so gut feel plays a strong role. But I guess in the business world, also personally, right? Usually would try to translate gut feel into a hypothesis, and then it becomes slightly easier because you can then go and collect some data or evidence. You can have conversations with people to prove or disprove that hypothesis that you have, and then be able to make your judgment based on that. But I do believe strongly in gut feel, especially actually, I would say where you don't have a like for like comparison. For example, if it's complex, where you're trying to figure out how people would react or behave in certain situations, it makes a lot of difference to be able to think from experience or from your gut feel.
And was that the case when you decided to move into the rare disease space?
It was, but rare disease, yes, in many ways it was. And to be honest, for rare diseases, I had one single kind of thing that drew me to it. And it was, without knowing what needed to be done, it was the fact that where I was working felt too far away from real patient impact. And rare diseases for me, in many ways, and it still does, even though now I work across therapy areas, it's very personal because you really, really feel every day that you're making a difference to people's lives. It's an area that is underfunded. There are about 7,000 rare diseases, many of them with genetic um, uh, kind of sources, but very few of them are understood. And there's treatments for a very, very small number of those. So there's a lot of work to be done in that area. And that gave me meaning and purpose.
No, that's very powerful. And I was reading about a few of them. Help me understand. So, to your point, the treatments are difficult, the awareness, the adoption, and even just the geographic and other kind of limitations to making sure that treatment actually gets to someone who needs it. How do you see that? How are you making it happen?
Um, it is an interesting but difficult area, and I think that's where somehow things have to change quite drastically. One of the reasons why there isn't that much innovation in that area is, the old model of pharma where you have patents that basically reward innovation and then you make the money in order to be able to fund other research, but that kind of breaks when you look at rare diseases because the number of people impacted by rare diseases is so small that you
True.
usually cannot make the money that you put into it, especially because there's a lot of research that needs to go into it with very, very little data. Um, I'll share a quick example. I mean, there are very personal stories in rare diseases. That's one thing that probably differentiates it from many others. We're all familiar with the ice bucket challenge, for example, right? Every one of us did it. It was born out of the grit of this person called Pete Freitas, who was diagnosed with ALS at the age of 27. In fact, I'd invited his mother a few years later in 2017, I think, when we organized a rare disease forum to try and reduce the time it takes to diagnose rare diseases. And she really shared their personal story of how you're faced with a diagnosis for a disease that was discovered many, many years ago, but for which a treatment did not even exist until then. Uh, Obviously, it went viral. They raised a lot of money in the short term. However, what is I think important and meaningful is it led to certain changes, starting with ALS, with the Act for increasing access to critical therapies in the US, resulting in government funding into neurodegenerative diseases. It also resulted in a few public private partnerships as well. So, finding other mechanisms or ways of trying to fund research certainly makes a difference. But I think we're also standing at a very interesting inflection point with everything that's happening with data and AI that if used in an intelligent, meaningful way, could mean a significant shift for rare diseases, not only because you can discover more, but also you can apply some of those algorithms to be able to diagnose diseases quicker and easier and to provide those treatments at a lower cost. One of the key things that has inhibited progress to date. So, no, I'm very optimistic that there is more to come in rare diseases.
Yeah, fascinating you talk about it. I was reading this, the DeepMind's AF3, and them talking about the single biggest impact they see is in the single gene mutation issues.
Mm,
ALS, cystic fibrosis, sickle cell anemia, many others. And this was fascinating that these are in very near term, in
mm,
not so many years away, they actually are treatable, if not
mm.
curable itself. So it was fascinating that, and to your point, these are hard to deal with issues, not just for the patient itself, but the families.
Yes. Yeah, totally. But also agree with you. There's a lot that's happening in terms of gene therapies as well, which will require some adjustment in the overall system of managing diseases, right? Because if we get to curative therapies that are super expensive at one point in time, how do healthcare systems pay for them? Though, actually, if you look at it longer term, the amount of money that you need to pay for that patient over their lifetime might be the same. So, there is some adjustment on both sides to figure that out when that something like that starts happening at scale. Today, there are very few gene therapies for very few patients in the world. But if that really grows, I mean, it's a totally different way of managing disease.
And do you see I see many farmers are now becoming a much more direct to consumer. Few are
Mm.
in experimenting, setting up the shops. How do you
What do you
see
mean?
that?
What do you mean by
Like
that?
Lily started Lily Direct, right?
Mm.
And starting to market therapies that are much more important and requires a lot more education,
Mm.
right? Beyond the doctor and the prescriber, if you will, working as a conduit. So maybe say more on that of how do you see the consumer behavior,
Mm.
both in domestic US, the part of the world where you work and even in the other emerging
Yeah.
countries. How do you see them changing?
Yeah, I mean, let me first maybe put in a caveat or differentiate, right? When you say direct to consumer in terms of direct advertising or promotion of medicines is limited to the US. And I think New Zealand is the only other country in the world that allows that. Everywhere else, it's regulated via healthcare
Correct.
professionals, right? So all other countries that comes into play. Having said that, I mean, providing medicines is a small part of the healthcare journey, right? And if we really have to join the dots and make a difference, one needs to look at it holistically. So, obviously, there's prevention. When I look at prevention, there are things that pharma are doing today with vaccines, for example. There is diagnosis, there's a lot more to do in diagnosis, and clearly there's some of that where you're seeing pharma starting to play a stronger role, especially when you're talking about personalized medicine or diagnostics for specific mutation oncology treatments as well. So there's a lot more of that that's starting to happen, though clearly there is huge room to improve. Then there is the actual treatment and finding the right treatment, where as we were discussing, it's the diagnosis and then really personalizing the treatment, and can also really benefit from technology and data and real world evidence as well. And then following that, a part which is often overlooked, which is what happens to the patient once they've got the medication, because there is a whole human touch to all of this. And the real piece for pharma companies, I believe, in the next frontier, is not necessarily how many units of medicines you've sold, but how much trust did you earn? How do you measure the patient outcome at the end of all of that? So there's a lot to do. Let's see what progress is made towards that. It's happening in pockets to some extent, but there should be a shift in that in the near future.
So, say you are in year 2050, maybe 25 years from now, and you have an opportunity to look back and say, hey, I wish we did this in year 2025, in the place and time and moment you are today. What would you say that we need to be looking at? Because to your point, if the momentum and the pace of AI adoption in pharma and the explosion across different therapy lines continues to keep it up, what would we need to be doing today?
It's a really good question, Praveen. I think I would say it goes, all of it will go back in the end, right? Whether it's technology or data that we leverage, or indeed join the dots, because the healthcare system is extremely complex, with a number of different stakeholders playing a role at different points in time. In the US, but actually also outside of the US, it's super fragmented as well, where data sets don't talk to each other. I think we have a huge opportunity to make the right connections, but build it with trust. I think trust was going to be super key going forward as well, because all of these things need to make sense. So, doing it with the right outcome in mind and being able to join the dots between different stakeholders, I think, is key to change. And maybe I will add one more point, if you don't mind. And I mean, though I worked most of my career in pharma, I think prevention. I mean, we all know that prevention is better than cure. How much do we spend on prevention right now versus how much do we spend on cure? I think there is opportunity to make a shift. And that's a difficult one because no one owns that. It's not just limited to technology or processes or systems, it sits in everyone's mind. It's a mindset shift.
Let's go there, because there's a personal story I feel that has to be explored to your point of prevention, and I think this is a hard one. So this is probably maybe 5-6 years back, and for some odd reason I decided to cut down. I was not necessarily overweight, but I thought I should maybe trim it down a little bit. It took me 3 months. Followed some guidance from some people who have done it before. Lightweight exercise, but a lot about food control and portion sizes and so on and so forth. And I was able to cut down like 30 pounds in, say, 90 days, without any medication. And but the important part is, can you maintain that cut? It's not just cutting it one time, right? So it doesn't rebound too much. So that was the second thing to maintaining it. And then you see this emergence of the medications. There's several in the weight loss categories. Actually, the fastest growing market segment for you guys today, the GLPs. And maybe there are people who genuinely need that, right? For obvious reasons. But there are people who may not need that, or maybe need only a little bit of that. But they do need some other kind of reinforcements. And to your point of prevention, where does that come from? I mean, outside your self motivation and maybe your circle of friends and family who tell you to do that, I don't see that kind of motivation coming from any part of the world, or any part of the sort of, whether it's the providers, or your health plans, at least in the US market, or public agencies in the Europe market, or even someone else sort of nudging you to do that. I'm just curious, how do you make it that happen?
I mean, in my humble opinion, I think there are bodies in the healthcare system today that for whom it makes every sense to focus on prevention, like your private insurance providers, any insurance providers. Many of them are providing services today to encourage you to lead a more healthy lifestyle. I think some of those objectives start to align because it makes sense for them. But partially, the issue is to what you say. The system is so set up to treat rather than to prevent, that there is no easy way. And there are some campaigns that are run from time to time. Your employer might do it. The government, in certain cases, has run certain campaigns, but there is a lot to do across different stakeholders. And I dare say the media has a role to play as well. I think they have a significant influence in our way of thinking on what we value as well. So there's potentially a lot of different stakeholders that can make a difference.
Interesting. Yeah, no, this is a hard one. This is not where you can sort of pinpoint to exact answer and hope it works. Let's switch gears. So you have led teams across multiple countries and you worked for some amazing bosses. And maybe just start with there. How has that experience been? And we'll explore this space further.
Um, so, Praveen, I worked many years in largely what I would say regional roles, global roles. These were very cross functional in nature. So, the good and the bad of it was one, you did not have direct hierarchies, but you had a lot of experts to call upon. So if you got it right, you could amplify the voices of everyone, and some magic would happen out of it. If you couldn't get it right, it would lead to almost no results at all. So I spent many years working in kind of that space. I also put myself out there to volunteer in some not for profit organizations where I had to pull on people that not only did not work for me, but they did this in their free time. So I really honed my muscle to work in matrix organizations where you're able to influence people in order to align on the objectives and deliver to the same results. More recently, I realized that matrix leadership is important and great, especially when you're working in a large organization or like some of the topics we were discussing, right, around prevention. You can't really make anything happen as a single body. You really need to find ways to bring a complex ecosystem together. But my other part is across different cultures, leading direct teams as well, and how that can be super different, both in terms of the makeup of the group that you're leading and their objectives, but also how you drive accountability within teams, how you drive clarity of vision. And I think the biggest learning is you can never communicate enough. I think that I have written down nicely. But I think those have been very foundational in some ways.
You touched something that I've always been exploring is this notion of being able to influence. And there's a lot of barriers to that, right? Your role, your title, maybe gender, maybe ethnicity, where you come from, what you're proposing, and so on and so forth. How do you do that? What have you found that worked for you or is still working for you?
Well, I would say the first and perhaps most important principle that I apply is I don't look for getting the credit for whatever it is that I'm asking for, right? So I'm very freely giving off the credit to whoever is part of the decision making, which makes it not my thing or my goal to achieve. It makes it our goal to achieve with my partners, whoever they are, or other stakeholders, feeling that they get something out of it as well. So that is certainly one element. But I think influence is not just direct, right? Influence is also indirect. So knowing and understanding that sort of ecosystem, who has influence, who is influenced by who as well, and perhaps being ready to have conversations early on and showing your willingness to listen and make changes if it makes sense to whatever your proposal is, often helps as well. And I find it results in something better than what I might have originally imagined. So, influence, I think, is not you driving things alone, it's you driving it with others, if I can put it that way.
And are there things that you value as you start to build your own team?
Yes, yeah, totally.
And what would those be?
Um, in terms of building your, I mean, I'm totally one of those that generally recruits a team based on attitude first and skills and experience after that. I think attitude can plug the gaps on a number of different things overall. So that's priority for me. I'm also super keen to have a team that is diverse. I do believe diversity of background, of thought, of approaches leads to much, much better results in the end. So that's always key in what I'm trying to build. And then I think there is an element of bringing in a mix of skills as well. So obviously you have to keep in mind what you're trying to deliver, and not that every person needs to check every box, but to have people that are able to do A, someone else who can do B, someone else who can do C, helps you be collectively a team that can deliver what is required. So I think those are some of the key factors. I'll mention one more, which I find is super important, especially in a fast evolving world, if I can put it that way. It's resilience as well. I would strongly like people who are able to get up and get going again if something doesn't work out, who are adaptable to change as well. I think it makes a big change and keeps everyone positive.
Very well said. I think I couldn't have answered that better. Yeah. I had this an amazing leadership coach in the last episode, and she was talking about leaders such as yourself as they grow through their career. One thing, because as they move through the ladder and do different things in their lives, have to deal with this notion of imposter syndrome,
Yep.
uh, especially when you are in a world of unknown. In terms of your duties and whatnot. I'm just curious. Have you felt it? Are you feeling it? How do you deal
Yes.
with that?
All the time. And I mean, I have to admit, sometimes I felt it wasn't imposter syndrome. I actually did not know anything. But I mean, once you've been through situations a few times, you realize you will go through perhaps that curve and you'll come out the other end. But Praveen, one of the things that's really helped me, I did not used to do it before, but I realized when you're into something totally new that you have no clue about, you can ask for help. And you'd be surprised how many people are willing to help if only you ask. And in my past self, I would not have dared to do that, because what does it show that I don't know? In today's world, I would always go and ask for help, ask for whoever knows how to do something better than I do. So that really helps me through different phases, especially when you take on a new role in an area that you're not familiar with. That really, really helps as well.
How do you build that muscle? I hear you, and I know it's extremely important to both for someone who's a career professional and someone who's entering the workforce, right?
Mm,
That, hey, there's an optionality available to you to talk to people and ask.
mm,
And surprisingly so, not many people still do that, right? I'm just curious, how do you build that muscle in you?
I mean, to be honest, I didn't do it to begin with, right? I wasn't born, I didn't start working with that muscle. I was
Mhm.
forced to use it. I was forced to use it when I like literally changed into a completely new role where expectations were high, but actually I didn't feel that anyone understood that I had no clue how to get there overall. That's when I thought there is only one way out. For me, that is to ask for some help, but then be smart enough that you pick up on it and act on it and get up to speed quickly on it, and that everyone appreciated, right? You also, through that process, you build relationships through that. People have seen you being vulnerable, they offer to help. You would also remember and do the same for them as well. So I think you can only do it by trying. You can also do it by offering to help people. We often notice someone else struggling, right? It might not be us, it might not be our direct team member. You can notice that someone else is new. They probably didn't understand whatever was said in the meeting and looked a bit stressed. You can go and ask if you can help them. So I think that's how you do it. But obviously, to your point, as you start to progress through your career pathway and you start to lead teams, you do realize that there will be a time when you will not know everything. You have to rely on other people to bring their expertise to the table. Your role then becomes to bring all of those pieces to make the right decision overall, but you don't know everything. So I think it's an important lesson.
How do you deal with failures?
Oh gosh, I told you I was a perfectionist for a very long time. So, no, not very well to begin with. In fact, I would do everything in my power to avoid a failure. However, I think I've changed over time. I don't think necessarily see everything as black and white necessarily, but I will try to ensure that whatever it is that I'm working towards is not limited to my siloed thinking, that I get input, advice, review, feedback from others and make it as strong as possible. Having said that, things can still fail, right? The important thing is to understand, go back and realize what it is that could be done differently. So I very much take that approach now because it's not a one time effort. You are learning in an ongoing manner.
How does you know a globe-trotting working mom
Hmm.
uh, has been doing this? I'm just curious. You have an amazing family. I know you're living a little bit distant from them today, but just curious, how have you been able to navigate that? Because I'm sure
Hmm.
there's a lot of women leaders, and yeah, it'll be interesting to learn.
Yeah. I mean, to be honest, I don't know if there's a straight answer to it, right? Because when people have talked about balance, I've just come to realize it over time that I haven't found necessarily balance on an everyday, daily basis, right? It's not like I do work 70% of the time and 30% of the time is family time every single day. But I've had I mean, I realize that your career is not 2 years or 3 years, it's a long journey. And I've had different priorities at different points in my career. I definitely put my family first during early part of my career. I took conscious decision to take roles where the amount of travel was lower than other roles. And then when my kids were a little bit older and I was a little bit frustrated at not doing some of the things I would like to do, I took on some other roles that involved a degree of travel. Where I am now is very, very different. I'm not even living in the same city at this point in time. But to your point, I felt very comfortable that I had done what I needed to do in a way in my mind with my children, my family, and both my husband, he super supported me because he's doing a lot of what I used to do. We like literally swapped roles on certain things, but also my kids who've been super supportive as well. So today it's not balanced on a daily basis, but the times that we spend together, I think we bond much, much more strongly. And we know this is not forever, right? So there is a period of time. So we'll get through it and we will have some different kind of balance going forward.
How do you go find time for yourself? And when you do that, what do you look for? I know you love swimming. I know you love reading, being on the beach, and I get all that. That's beautiful. But I'm just curious, beyond that time, what does Radhika thinks and do?
Oh, Radhika, like anytime she gets, she runs to a cafe with a book.
Okay.
And usually it's like on her own. She's not interested in going to a cafe with anyone
Okay.
else. That's my, like, I don't know why, but it's that sort of feeling from many summer holidays spent with boredom and nothing else to do but finding a good book, which I felt I completely like kind of lost in the early sort of career years, busy juggling family, etc. I felt like 10 years. I did not read at all. I did not find that time. So actually, even I use it to think. I love the I love the kind of diversity of thought coming from different fields, functions, kind of I mean, you can call it interdisciplinary in a way, but so in a little bit of creativity, reading, science coming in. I thrive in that kind of inputs or environment overall. So even at work, you will sometimes find me like escape out of the office when I have some thinking to do, and I will go to a cafe, sit there for an hour, do my thinking, write it on a paper, and then come back. But yeah, that's me.
And are there things that you used to value and you don't today?
Um, I mean, it's a good question. What do I not value anymore? I mean, I value a lot more today, like family, relationships, things like being versus endlessly doing things, being thoughtful about what you do. I think it might be with everyone, right, as you grow older, but certainly I can feel, do I care that much about what other people think? Probably not a lot. I'm very comfortable being me. Uh, Certainly learning on things that you would want to improve on, change, etc. But do I need to work to other people's opinions or expectations always? No, not any longer.
So imagine you have an option where you're standing on a stage and the audience is the CEOs of all the leading healthcare and pharma shops under the sun. And you have three messages to pass on. What would those be?
Oh, wow. I think biggest in there would be to, how can I put it? It's like whole system thinking in a very like basic way, which is, can we bring ourselves like out of our silos and our specific businesses into what will really drive change overall? And that's where our conversation around joining the dots between different parts of the system to see what will really make an impact, not thinking about, I do diagnostics only, I have medicines in this area only, etc. I think that would be super. And very related to that is collaboration, because one of my maybe personal highlights that I'm very proud of in rare disease was I helped set up something called RxRE, which was the first time we brought together patient advocates, policy makers, payers, key opinion leaders with pharma and health tech startups into one forum to work together to see how you could accelerate rare disease diagnosis. But the same concept can apply to multiple other areas. So really, how do you actually bring collaboration about, not at the cost of one versus the other? And the third would really be impact and how we think about trust and impact. What do we measure? Today, a lot of companies talk about patient centricity, whether you're talking about pharma, you're talking about diagnostics, healthcare, etc., etc. What does it really mean? And when will we start measuring ourselves on patient outcomes? That requires different thinking overall.
Interesting. And say if you have an option to go back and tell something to a 13-year-old Radhika,
Oh gosh.
what would that be?
I think dream big, I think, would be what I would say, because maybe not in exactly the way that you dreamed of, but dreams can become reality. They might just change shape in some form. But if you don't dream, you don't have the ability to make that change happen. So, yeah, that would be my one piece of advice.
Okay, so on that, maybe the last question for you. Now, Radhika, new Radhika, if you had one thing you can change in the world, what would you do?
Um, I mean, I talked a little bit about health. I would still go back to it. I feel it is it is super fundamental, but actually it's going to be even more important going forward. I would change, I would look at how one could change the mindset or incentives for people making an effort to stay healthy, people taking accountability for their health. Though I totally recognize that there are elements that individually we cannot influence because there are a lot of other parameters, both environmental and genetic, that play into health. But where we have control, I think we have a big role to play, and I would really anchor on that.
That's a big one. And I know that's a hard one, so well said. Well, this has been a fascinating conversation. Learning about your
Likewise.
journey,
Yeah,
your moment, your
likewise.
truth. Thank you.
Now, I think, Praveen, I will have to put you on the hot seat someday. You asked me all the difficult questions and you were able to run out scot-free.
No, so the funny thing with this is I don't have to answer anything. Maybe someday. Yeah. I'm
No,
enjoying
but
what I'm doing. Yeah, go ahead.
yeah,
Sorry.
but no, thank you. It was fascinating conversation. It also made me think harder and reflect on a few things. And as I think about next stages of life and career, really think about where I can make an impact. So thank you
Of
for
course.
having
And
this conversation.
absolutely. And I do have lots of recommendations for your cafe trips. And I just came back from a trip to Norway. So if you ever want them, I have like a big list of it. I can give it to you.
So this is like big list of books or
No,
big list of
from
cafes?
cafes. Books, no, that you
No?
decide. Cafes, yes, I can give you that.
Oh, absolutely. I will certainly be following up on that.
Very cool. Thanks, Radhika. Appreciate it.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Pat.
Thank you.